where are we going on tariff policy? Let me rephrase that. Not necessarily where we're going, because I don't know if anyone knows where we're going. But how do you think the market is digesting all of these policy shifts, the ups and downs, and at least right now, a lot of things that Trump has threatened haven't actually been implemented?
Right. I think, first of all, your introduction was perfect, twists and turns. And I think what's happened is the market has gotten so accustomed to twists and turns that when there's a twist that they don't like, they assume a turn that will be more benign is coming very shortly. What we need more than anything else is a settling down of this so that what I believe are pretty positive forces in our economy can take over, and I think that generally would be pretty positive for the market. But right now, the volatility is very painful.
Well, that's what I'm curious about. Are you of the mindset that, A, the volatility might actually start to tamp down a little bit, presuming that we do get a little bit more clarity as to what tariffs are going to be, what level they're going to be at, who's going to be impacted by them?
Well, I take a little bit of I'm looking through the twists and turns at the moment, and there are a couple things that I think are really important. Number one, we are, first of all, the economy is in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
Unemployment is quite low. Employment is steady. Inflation is gradually drifting down. There doesn't seem to be any significant pull through on inflation from the tariffs that have been put in place so far. So there's a lot of underlying strength. Then you put on top of that, we've just had passed and signed by the president a very stimulative fiscal policy. So the next 6 quarters, 8 quarters, 10 quarters, there's going to be a wind at the back of the economy. You add to that the next move in interest rates is almost certainly down. And so you have a increasingly accommodative monetary policy. You have a supportive and, in fact, stimulative fiscal policy. So once we get through this period of volatility and uncertainty, there's some pretty strong tailwinds behind the economy and therefore behind the markets.
You mentioned interest rates. You think there is an economic case to start cutting interest rates soon, meaning sooner than later?
I think the Fed is absolutely correct in waiting until there is a little bit more evidence as to either a little bit more weakening in employment or a little bit more reduction in inflation. There's no cost to waiting right now, and particularly when, the Fed did kind of blow it a little bit on transitory. And so to be premature in cutting rates when there's still inflation above their targets. And I'm a believer that we'll have a couple cuts this year. And if you ask me the probability of 3 versus 1, I would say the probability of 3 is greater than 1.
Well, the president, of course, continues to exert as much pressure as he can. And I want you to listen to something that he said about this a little bit earlier at that cabinet meeting.
He should resign immediately. We should get somebody in there that's going to lower interest rates.
Do you want congressional
Why don't
Republicans
you call for his resignation?
Do you want congressional Republicans to investigate and pursue?
It's okay with me. I think he's terrible. He's always late. But he wasn't late with Biden before the election. He was cutting him like crazy. It didn't help too much, did it?
All right, so Ralph, cutting through some of the hyperbole and the asides, there is a question here about what the next Fed chair is going to look like. One way or the other, Powell is going to be gone within a year's time, whether it's earlier than that or in May of next year. And it gets to the question as to who would you like to see fill that role? A lot of names that have been bandied about, Kevin Warsh, Waller, a few others. Obviously, Trump is going to lean towards somebody, presumably, that he thinks is going to be a little bit more dovish than his perception of Jay Powell.
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, let's not forget that Jay Powell, who the markets are venerating right now, was appointed by Donald Trump. So he has a history of appointing people who are actually well received by the markets. The people that you've listed as a general matter, I think, would all be pretty well received by the markets. And I think once you sit in that seat, first of all, your job is to build consensus among 12 members of the Open Market Committee, the 7 seating governors and 5 from the regions.
Yeah.
And one does not do that with bombast and with pounding the table for one view when it's out of touch with the economic realities.
But do you think Powell's done a good job? I mean, he was well received by the market, as you said. And I mean, there were some concerns when he came in because he wasn't like a traditional economist. But for the most part, it seems like the market warmed to him pretty quickly. They've been relatively happy with his guidance. I mean, I know they made some mistakes on the transitory side, but you were if I remember correctly, back in, 2017 or whenever, you were relatively supportive of his nomination.
I'm supportive of his nomination. I think he's, in large measure, done not a good job, but an excellent job. I really do. And not always in the easiest of circumstances. And by the way, there were plenty of other people, not at the Federal Reserve, who thought that the COVID-induced inflation would disappear very quickly and would in fact be transitory. So, and once it became clear that that was not the case, I thought the Fed moved incredibly aggressively, and the victories we're having in inflation right now, and the fact that we have not had a recession, is a pretty strong tribute to their policy.
I am curious with regards to policy, and I guess more importantly, politics. You mentioned the budget and tax bill that was recently signed by the president, something that, of course, members of Congress as well as members of the administration are going to go out to the public and sell. The market, to a certain extent, likes it. I guess the question is, do you think this is something that's going to have resonance with rank and file voters as we head into a midterm season next year?
Well, this bill continues a lot of benefits for people like myself at the expense of people who are living from hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck, and who are dependent upon the federal government for health care and for food. I don't believe that is particularly resonant with the voters at large.
I am curious as to what you think about the voters at large. We just had a mayoral primary here in New York. Zohran Mamdani, Democratic Socialist, won the primary. Still got a long way to go before actually becoming mayor. But there's been a lot of discussion here about this move to the further left by the Democrats as maybe a potential counterpoint to this big move we've seen to the far right by the Republicans. And I am curious if you think that people like Mamdani are maybe the answer for Democrats, or are they looking in the wrong place?
Well, first of all, elections are not only about the respective policies of the 2 candidates or 3 candidates or 4 candidates, but also about their energy and their leadership skills and their personality. So I think, in my own view, and I could be wrong, Mamdani's win was as much a repudiation of his primary opponent, who barely campaigned and didn't show up to some of the debates. And Mamdani did something that's really important for the Democratic Party. He increased turnout on the part of those 25 to 35 by 30%. Very high enthusiasm. So we got to bottle that. My guess is if you lined up his policies and those of more centrist policies in a blind taste test, the majority of people would support the centrist policies. However, something that he has gotten very right and that the Democratic Party has to focus relentlessly on is affordability. People, the vast majority of people in this country are not benefiting from the extraordinary performance that we've had in our economy to the extent that the top people are. And that has to be fixed.
And that's a nationwide issue. And some people would say almost directly responsible for Trump's ascent, because he really tapped into a lot of that angst that we saw across this country of people who felt that same way.
Yeah, and remarkably, his policies aren't particularly responsive to that angst, but he still, has some popularity.
When you hear a lot of, I mean, obviously there are a lot of folks on Wall Street, a lot of wealthy people in New York who, when they see somebody like Mamdani and the prospect that he might be mayor, they're all saying, okay, we're going to, depart and go to Florida or Texas or wherever. And I know there are a lot of folks who say that and don't really follow through in that. And New York will always be New York City, the financial capital of the world. But do you see any threat to the city standing as being the financial capital?
Well, if you're the mayor of New York City, you care about a handful of things, and you care a lot about them. You care that there are a lot of jobs here. So being anti-business, anti-capitalist is not a good spot for a mayor to be. You care that housing is plentiful and affordable, and 100 economists out of 100 can tell you that if you cap rents, people don't build housing. You care about education, which unfortunately has not been discussed hardly at all in this campaign, and to me is the principal source of upward mobility in our society, and we're not doing a great job educating the 900,000 students who are in our public school system. And you care about public safety, obviously. So it's a little bit like the question you asked me about whoever sits in Powell's seat. Once he or she sits in Powell's seat, there's a certain collegiality and the president appointed you, but you're going to do what you believe is right. Once you sit in the mayor's seat, you're going to do what's right for this city on those four things that are fundamental to livability here.
A loaded question here, but why didn't you ever pursue politics?
Well, I spent the first 7 years of my career in Washington as an economist on the Joint Economic Committee in Washington, in Congress, and then 4 years working for President Carter before you were born in the White House. And when I was in Washington, there was a solid core of Democrats and Republicans who would always do the right thing for the country. We've lost a fair amount of that. It's very tribal. If you're either with me or against me, you're a Democrat or Republican. And there's still people, I think, who believe in that. But unfortunately, in both parties, they're disappearing. I mean, look at Tom Tillis.
I know.
Sad.
Do you think there's any hope, though, that we can maybe get that back? Or what would it take to get that back? Does it have to be some catastrophe?
Well, the challenge we have is that in the vast majority of elections in this country today, not the presidential, but in most senatorial and congressional elections, the primary is the election. So Tom Tillis could probably get reelected if he got the nomination. But if Donald Trump puts a conservative candidate against him in the primary, he might lose. And that's a very sad thing.